How's it going? Welcome to the Trades and Grades podcast. I'm your host, Noah Wright, and alongside me is Caleb Nemi. No Camden Gongwer today. He's still at the office doing accounting work. Sucks to be him. So sorry, Camden. We've now swapped you out. So now we have two guys again. Maybe at some point we'll get our third guy back on here, as Caleb did have internet issues last week. So we're glad to have you back on here, Caleb.
Of course, Xfinity. Can't blame them. You pay them all the money and then doesn't work when you need it.
No.
So
Yep.
hopefully tonight goes better.
Absolutely. So we're here to break down some rookie running backs for the class of 2022. It's an interesting class, especially like starting a year ago. This is kind of the first time I've really gotten into rookies, in depth. So you've probably had a little bit different experience with, especially some of these previous classes where you have, Jonathan Taylor and Javonte Williams and J.K. Dobbins and Travis Etienne, Najee Harris. I mean, it's a lot of studs right there just off the top of my head. So this class might be a little bit more down than previous years, I would say.
Oh, for sure. I think this year the running back rookie class is just super weak. But I mean, like we said, we've been blessed the last few years to have amazing. If you had a top 5 pick, you were getting a stud. So sometimes you just have to
Right.
have a down year.
Yep. And that's kind of what it looks like. But it's unique in its own ways where I feel like there's so many different guys this year that you can plug in and out outside of the top, maybe two or three or four that, if, just depending on the draft capital they get, um, you could see them taken all over the place in some of these rookie drafts. So it's kind of difficult. We're going to go through kind of our rankings. And this is basically just based off of prospects, what we see I'm watching film or what we like from the analytical side, or what we read, in articles or on Twitter, what have you. Just getting a feel for who these players are. So like a lot of this can change come, after next Thursday, Friday, Saturday, in the NFL draft. And so this is just good to keep in mind. Like this is just prospects, and I'm sure a lot of this will probably change with the draft capital.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and get started here. To pretty much no surprise at all. I'll go ahead and start with my rankings. But number one, I have Brees Hall out of Iowa State. Number two, Kenneth Walker. Three, Isaiah Spiller. Four, Rashad White. Five, Zamir White. Six, James Cook. Seven, Damian Pierce. And eight, Tyler Beatty.
And for me, I got number 1, Brees Hall, 2, Kenneth Walker, 3, Rashad White, 4, Isaiah Spiller, 5, Brian Robinson, 6, James Cook, 7, Kyron Williams, and 8, Damian Pierce.
Yeah, so I mean, we have a few different guys, shaking up. Some I have, some you don't, vice versa. So like I said, it's a really deep class when it comes to like just like lower tiered guys that you can see get drafted, in day two, in the second or third round, which it'll be really interesting to see where guys go. But the one star of this draft, in my opinion, is Brees Hall, the unanimous 101, most likely, especially in one QB. I would say probably as well in Superflex unless Malik Willis gets some sort of really good landing spot. But Brees Hall is out of Iowa State, standing at 5'11", 217 pounds. He ran a 4.3940 at the combine, which was a lot faster than I was expecting, to be honest. Not that he's not quick on tape, but I would say one of his knocks is his long speed. If you watch his tape, he's not the like quickest once you get past the first two tiers of the defense. He's not going to be out running anybody really. He kind of just maintains speed with other runners. So seeing that 4.39, that just speaks to kind of his burst. And so I mean I was really happy with that. And he's got a 40-inch vertical, which is just absurd compared to the rest of this class. So I was happy with that.
Yeah, I think the crazy thing about Brees Hall is he was kind of being compared a little bit to his former teammate David Montgomery a little bit
Yeah.
right before the combine. People were saying, "Oh, he's a good running back, but maybe not the elite athlete." And then, of course, the combine happens, and you realize he's kind of in that Jonathan Taylor type running back, just elite athleticism. So Um, Looking forward to seeing where he goes. He's probably going to go, I probably assume, in the second round, maybe even late first. And I think the big thing with Brees Hall is this class, since there's not a lot of depth behind him, it's not going to be like one of those years where a CEH can get drafted before Jonathan Taylor and all of a sudden CEH is the 101. Brees Hall
Right.
is going to be the 101 no matter what, no matter where his landing spot is. And I'm just excited to see where he lands.
Yeah, I think it will be really interesting to see if a team, makes a move to try and get him in the first round. I think the most obvious team to do that right now, before any trades happen, is probably the Bills. I feel like that is one of the biggest landing spots because they have everything else. They just signed Stephon Diggs. They have their quarterback for the next probably 10 years or so, and Josh Allen. Their defense has been pretty solid, so they've been pretty much using running back by committee for a while now, and to have that one final piece, I could see the Bills moving up, maybe making that at the end of the first. It's probably more unlikely than anything, but it's possible. I agree. I think it's probably going to be in the early second, maybe Falcons, Texans, something like that. As somebody who has the 101 in his home dynasty league, I kind of hope it's on the Texans. I don't know how to feel about that. They're just a mess.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's going to be really. This is one of the weird years where there's not a lot. You kind of saw a lot of teams out in free agency signing pretty cheap running backs,
Yeah,
and this is also a place, of course, in the draft to get your cheap young running backs. So I think there's not a lot of spots where you're like, oh, this is like an absolutely like. Even if he goes to the Bills, like I think a lot of people are going to overhype that landing spot just because of like they don't have a running back. But I mean, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss and even last year, Matt Breida had a little bit of fantasy value throughout
yeah,
the season, but I mean, Josh Allen steals so many of those goal line carries. I don't know if
that's true.
that's just like the most amazing spot for him to land. But like I said, a lot's going to change. But no matter where he goes, even if he goes to a team where he goes like, I'm not even saying this is a spot, but like if he goes to the Tampa Bay Bucks and he's behind Leonard Fournette for a year, like I'm still drafting Brees Hall 101 no matter what.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I can't imagine a position that would make any NFL sense in which he would be at such a disadvantage and you wouldn't pick him like at the 101, unless you're really high on one of the wide receivers that got drafted, maybe Garrett Wilson or Traylon Burks or Drake London. Somebody got drafted in a perfect spot. You think, okay, well this is a lock. Outside of that, I mean, I'm not drafting Kenneth Walker regardless of where he goes. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to pick him over Brees Hall, um, regardless of landing spot. It's just one of those, like, there's just an entire tier for me. It's like you have Brees Hall and then teardrop, and then Kenneth Walker, and then we'll go through the rest of our rankings. But before we move on to number two, I do want to make note, like, watching Brees, I think his biggest attribute is his elusiveness timed with his patience and his vision. Like those, I guess it's three things, but like really all those he uses super super well. If he like just watching him, he will sit behind the line, and sometimes it's almost a detriment when you get people who are like too patient. You know what I mean? And they kind of just wait for the hole, and all of a sudden it's like you miss your time. But he waits for the perfect timing. He shoots through the gap, and then it's like he's like a snake gets through the line. All like it's and he's a decent pass catcher, which I can't really say for our next guy, which is Kenneth Walker out of Michigan State, coming at 5'9". I have on here 211, ran a 4.5540. I think that's right. Um, and he was at Wake Forest for a year or two, transferred to Michigan State, and I was watching a documentary about it the other day. Just popped on the TV, and the head coach for Michigan State was like, when we're looking at this guy, when we bring in transfers, 10 play guys, and if you have to watch more than 10 plays, they're not for you. And he said, I watched less than 10 plays. I already knew Kenneth Walker was that guy for us. And boy, did he show up. I mean, was he the leading rusher in the FBS, I believe. I mean, he something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
He was fantastic. He had a great year. Um, so I mean, I really don't have any knocks on him, like other than the fact that he's just not the same type of prospect as Brees Hall. I mean, I have him as my number two, but he's just not like quite at that level. I think he's a really good runner, but the problem is, he just didn't have that pass catching. I think that's one of his biggest holes. That it might not be something he can't do, but he just hasn't been able to show it yet.
Yeah, no, totally agree with you on that one. I think the big thing when I think of like Kenneth Walker, I think back to the Michigan State and Michigan game where he absolutely ran wild, kind of made his Heisman like moment. No, he didn't win the Heisman, but
Yeah,
if anyone was going to, it was going to be Kenneth Walker last year as a running back. uh, there's just so many things that you can like. There's of course the knocks that he didn't produce early on in his career because he was at Wake Forest and then had to go to Michigan State. But absolutely balled out at Michigan State. Like I feel like the competition you go up against the Big Ten is a lot better than probably what you're going with in the ACC. At least when you're talking like defensive line and linebackers. Plus, I always like running backs that play in the cold. I think that really shows a lot of toughness and I think maybe even like sometimes you look at like people that play in the Big Ten, and I'm biased because I'm a Ohio State fan, but uh, you look at them and you're like, man, they just can't. They don't run as fast, but they're playing in like 30-degree weather, getting like hit, and like I just can't imagine like the toughness that you have to go through. So I really think Kenneth Walker, as long as he like gets that second round draft capital, I could see him honestly if we look back on this in 2 or 3 years. We might be making the mistake and saying that Kenneth Walker was the RB1 of this class instead of Brees Hall just because of that college production. But I just think based on the current stats or the current metrics that Brees Hall hits, just with his speed and his overall like body of work, like he's easily the RB1. But I could see Kenneth Walker jumping him in the future for sure.
yeah. I mean, he's really. I thought he was really physical. He had really good yards after, or not yards after catch. Was it yards per carry? I feel like, I mean, he was just a really good in between the tackles runner, and I feel like he was able to get the outside well. In which, like, sometimes if you're a physical guy, it's a little tough to get on the outside. Maybe you're not quite as quick laterally. I feel like he had that fine. Um, he I have down okay patience, okay vision, receiving question mark. Kind of went over that. Um, but I mean, you're not going to be a bad prospect when you're racking up and have a chance for, if you're, like you said, he's probably the best college running back there was last year in terms of production. Um, so yeah, I mean, I agree. I could see maybe if he gets that PPR, those catches, and some team works with him on that, I could see it as a possibility of him maybe reaching Brees in a couple years. But as of right now, I have him slated at 2. So move on to number 3, Isaiah Spiller, coming out of the SEC. A little bit warmer down there. Um, let's see. Here we go. Texas A&M, 6 foot, 217, ran. Let's see. I can't remember. I don't even recall what he ran on his 40. I don't have it down.
I think it was
But
a 4.69 at his pro day.
yeah, I was gonna say it was. I know it wasn't fast, but I don't have that one down. But yeah, I mean, I actually really enjoyed to watch Isaiah Spiller. I've seen him all over the board, in different mock drafts and things on Twitter. But I felt like him and Walker were pretty close. For me, I think that it's kind of goes like Brees, there's a teardrop. Kenneth, there's a minor teardrop, and then I have like Spiller and my next guy. But I enjoyed watching Spiller. He had that, catching ability. I think sometimes the one negative I might have on him is he's so geared up, like he can cut on a dime and he has that burst. Sometimes he's like almost like he was cutting so hard that he's like kind of almost off balance. I think he's a really really good athlete. Um, but that was kind of he almost seemed like he was just had so much energy he didn't know how to contain it. But he's a freak. Um, I enjoyed watching him. I don't know if he has that top end speed, kind of same thing like Brees, where I don't know if he's gonna be beating guys down the field so much, where he's getting those long rushes. But yeah, I mean, I it's gonna be tough to say. All this is tough to say without knowing draft capital. So I like him as a prospect, though.
Yeah, I when I think of Isaiah Spiller, I just think of his father, Fred Spiller. I don't know if
Yeah,
anyone this what that would have been back in was that like 2008 when he was running back, 2007, 2008. I'm trying to remember who the other running back because he was in a committee with another pretty good running back. It wasn't Marshawn Lynch. Willis McGay. I don't. Anyway, too long ago. But he plays exactly like his father. Like his father wasn't fast. His father could really catch the ball out of the backfield.
Yeah.
And he just played smart. And I think that's what Isaiah Spiller is. He's just a smart football player. I think, of course, he doesn't have maybe that like high end speed, but at the end of the day, like a lot of the guys that we think of that are speedsters at running back really don't produce unless, of course, they're built like a pretty solid Jonathan Taylor.
Right.
Um, or I guess I should clarify that because Chris Johnson was a killer fantasy running back,
It's true.
and he was really fast.
He's a freak.
He was a freak. But yeah, I mean, Isaiah Spiller, great prospect. I think it's just like going to matter about the draft capital. If he goes in the third round, even early fourth, I'm going to be okay with it, depending on landing spot. But if kind of I've seen some mocks where he's slipping into like the middle of the fourth, even early fifth, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. If that
Yeah,
happens,
I'd
then
be.
I'd be out on Isaiah Spiller for sure. And that's why I have him as my RB4. I know you have him as your RB3.
Yeah.
But like I said, there's so many, like once you get past the RB1 and RB2, like there's a clear tier break for me that it just is going to depend on the draft capital.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I mean, technically, so if we're going through our rankings, um, we do have these guys. We have Isaiah Spiller tied, and then going on to our next guy, Rashad White out of Arizona State, both tied at 3. We didn't get to have Camden's rankings, like I said, because he was working. So, and these are prospect based, so it'll be a little more important once we start ranking these after the draft anyway. So we'll be able to get his input then. Um, yeah, out of Arizona State, 6', 210. I ran a 4.40. Yeah, 30 inch in vertical, which I mean that's pretty good. So I was watching some before we got on earlier this afternoon, kind of refresh on who Rashad White is and kind of how he wins. And I thought he was a fine prospect. He did I heard good remarks about him at the Senior Bowl. That was a couple months ago, but I know that he was one of the guys that really liked down there. I feel like he had pretty good elusiveness. He's be able to get evade tackles pretty well, and I just see him more of as a safe type pick. He's a good. He doesn't get me like fired up like, man, this guy could be a running back, yeah, middle to high running back 2, or maybe even a back end running back 1. I think he's safe for PPR. I felt like watching some of the games, he was a really good pass catcher. There's one that he had down open the field. He's probably 20 yards downfield, and he wasn't comfortable there because he wasn't a receiver, and he dropped it because some guy was going to come in and hit him. But outside of that, like there's a couple of them where he just looks so effortless. Him catching the ball and taking down the run. So I mean, he's not somebody that I'm like, oh, this could be a sleeper to be like a fantastic running back. But I think he's a very safe pick if you have him, middle of the second round or beginning of the second round or what have you. So
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I was going to even add that once you get past those top two guys, and then depending on where Isaiah Spiller lands and draft capital, um, I'm pretty much staying away from any running back until we're talking the second round, just because of
yeah,
these profiles.
yes,
I think the big thing with Rashad White, when I look at him, like, cool, he's got the great profile, great receiving back, decent burst score. Yeah, we said like 40-yard dash, cool, like he ran a 4.48. But the big thing with him is he's 23 years old. He's 23.2 years old. I like my typical strategy when I'm building a dynasty team or I'm looking to draft running backs. I want to draft the youngest guys possible because maybe by the time they start to produce, I want them to be 22 or 23 because then I can get maybe 2 or 3 years before they hit. Because right when they hit the age of 25, that's when I'm trying to ship them off. Because that's typically they have maybe 1 or 2 years left of like that high end production where you can sell high and then
yeah,
buy the next young stud. Like I know a lot of people in my leagues, they were selling off the Derrick Henrys, the Alvin Kamara's, and getting the Jonathan Taylors 2 seasons ago. So not that those guys aren't still producing, but it kind of just shows like how you can build your dynasty teams. But specifically when I'm looking at this, like cool, if you're really running back needy, just wait until the second round, but don't miss out on the wide receivers that are available because I think those are going to be a lot better values in the late first, early second.
yeah. I mean, I think it's a really important thing to note. I don't have their ages down like right away, but I think that is extremely important, especially in dynasty, to look at. You know, like you mentioned, running backs like shelf life is a lot quicker than any other position. Um, and so it's tough when you see a guy that, okay, well, I might like this guy if he gets good draft capital. Oh, wait, he's going to be 23 years old. Um, you're like you said, like you're gonna get what 2 years maybe out of him, maybe three, and then you're like, okay, I kind of want to drop this guy. Whereas, and I obviously this isn't the same because Brees Hall's way better, but Brees Hall's 20 years old right now, and he'll be 21 in a couple months when the season starts. So those are types of things. Like if you're tied with somebody else, and you're like trying to figure out, okay, am I gonna go between this guy and this guy? And you know the draft capital and everything's the same. And you just can't figure it out. Like age, that's such a great indicator, in my opinion, of something. Like if you got nothing else, like I'm looking at that and be like, okay, well, I'm going with the younger guy. Like, why would you? It's dynasty. Why would you not go with the younger guy?
No, for sure. And I think not that we're talking about age, we're talking about the rookies here, but even when I think back to like last year's draft and seeing like everyone was hyping up Najee Harris was way over Javonte Williams. But now if you're looking at it, like I would probably take Javonte Williams over Najee Harris because I think Najee Harris, I think he just turned 24 and Javonte's still like
He's
21.
old.
So like that's like a 3 year differential. So trying to like that doesn't quantify maybe the rookie season or like this year it won't really matter, but like coming into like his third year when you're looking at that like trade value, like Javonte Williams, if he produces and of course is like an RB1,
Right.
RB2, he's still gonna have that high dynasty value where Najee Harris will start to get to that like age apex, like I
Yeah.
like to call it.
Yeah. He's gonna get there a lot faster than Javante, and I don't know how old Travis Etienne is. I feel like he's probably maybe in the middle.
Yeah,
But
I think Travis Etienne is 22.
okay. So we'll move on to our next guy. Coming in at number 5 is James Cook out of the University of Georgia, coming in at 5'11", 199. I'm going to start looking these up, but he is 22 right now. He'll be 23 when the season starts. So another one of those guys that's just a little bit older. But in case you didn't know, he is a younger brother of Dalvin Cook. Not sure if you've heard of him. Minnesota Vikings, RB1 for a while now. But yeah, when it comes down, like the further we go down this list, the more that I start to look at guys who are going to have a role in the NFL for some reason. And to me, this guy is someone who's going to have a role because of his pass catching. He's on the smaller side, which makes me nervous a little bit. I don't. His build's not incredible. He's just under 200 pounds. I mean, you could put a couple pounds on and be over 200, but he's just not the biggest guy. But he was a great pass catcher when he's at Georgia. I feel like he's gonna have like that's his thing. And outside of that, I don't see him running in between the tackles a ton because that's what they had Zamir White there for. So I think like it's people, it's guys like your Naheem Hines and J.D. McKissick's where they have a role and it's just PPR. And if they're not going to go out and be league winners, but they can still get into your lineup when you need them.
Yeah, no, I think James Cook is one of those guys that will definitely be able to be a plug and play running back. I'm trying to think of guys this year like where one of the starter goes down and all of a sudden James Cook gets a role.
Right.
I definitely think that'll be really beneficial. Of course, he's got that same kind of elusiveness that his older brother has a little bit, just not as big and not as physical. So I think it's just going to be depending on landing spot. If you can, I think if he falls to anywhere in like the 208, 209 range, I think that's a good spot if you're running back needy. Otherwise, I'm probably like I said, holding off on some of these running backs.
Yeah, he did run a faster 40 than his brother. He ran a 4.42, so he's got the speed for sure. He's not he's even though he's not terribly he's not terribly big. He is bursty, like I said, and he has good pass catching. So yeah, I would agree. I think it's just a lot of this is we're gonna say this a million times, but depending on draft capital, I see it as a middle of second round type of guy, and a lot of these are probably gonna be middle to second round type of guys. You could probably put them in a bag and mix them up and pull out a name and like, okay, that's fine with me. I guess I'm going with that. Um, but yeah, coming in at tied for 6, we'll just go right to his teammate Zamir White, out of Georgia. He's coming in at 6', 214, ran a 4.40. Um, there's there's a reason they call him Zeus. This dude is absolutely massive. If you ever look up, you can find a picture of him standing next to DeAndre Swift, and it just looks like he could eat DeAndre Swift. He is absolutely gigantic. He came out of his high school class. I think it's 2018 is his high school class, and he was ranked the number 1 running back in the nation. He goes to Georgia. I think it was his senior year of high school. He tears his ACL, and then he goes to Georgia his freshman year, then tears his other ACL. So he's torn both ACLs at one point. I mean, that really set him back. So he's kind of struggled since then. Everybody was like, especially in like Devy leagues where, that's kind of a premium, is getting those young stud running backs. And they just kind of, that hype train kind of fell off. But this past year, I feel like he's really been able to shine, especially on a championship team, with the Bulldogs. And I like him a lot. He's just a really tough physical runner. He's tough to bring down. He didn't get that pass catching because of James Cook being there. I don't know if that'll be his role per se. Um, I'm a little worried about the injuries. Obviously, it's kind of hard not to be. I don't want to be like that guy, but you have the injury history, and I'm gonna check what his age is, but he's 22. He'll be 23. He's a week apart from James Cook, so he'll be 23 again. Another older running back, with multiple injuries. So I think he's going to be a great steal in a draft for the first 2 to maybe 3 years, because I think he will produce, not so much PPR wise, but I think he'll be a really tough runner.
Yeah, he reminds me oddly of like a LeGarrette Blunt, like just
Yeah.
someone that's going to be really really tough to tackle.
Right.
I think the other thing that happens with these Georgia running backs is they do such a good job at having 2 to 3 they run a committee. I think that's kind of
Yes.
what they tell recruits is,
Yep.
hey, it doesn't matter if we get 3 5-star guys, like you guys are all going to touch the ball and have like really low traction, and we're going to get you to the NFL. Which works out because I mean almost all the Georgia running backs over the last few years have been drafted,
Yeah.
just maybe not as high. I mean, Swift was in the early second round, but maybe not as high as some of their other counterparts. But they're coming in with less wear and tear. I think the
Exactly.
reason that I didn't put Zamir White in my top 8 is not purely it's purely just for this point where just I'm shooting for upside when I'm thinking about drafting a running back and just knowing that he hasn't had that pass catching role. And like I know we talk about like Kenneth Walker, like we're worried about him catching the ball, but like Zamir White is not catching the ball. Like
Yeah.
he'll be, but he will have the goal line role probably, most
Yeah.
likely, if he can get on the field at all. So he's got that touchdown upside, but other than that, like that's not something that excites me because touchdowns are so fluky. So, um, but I like I said, he was an amazing prospect. So if he can regain even just a portion of what he was as a senior coming into his freshman year before he tore those ACLs, I mean, at this point, what he can't tear any more ACLs, right? He already tore both of them. Star, he should
this
be good,
this
right?
is true. You would hope so. Yeah, I think him a lot more so than others will like the where he goes will really like make me feel either really good or maybe not so good because of those red zone touches. I feel like it's one of those things where you're going to depend on that. He's one of those guys where you'd expect him to be lining up for those, you know, touchdown opportunities. And if he gets on a team where you have a rushing quarterback or they already have a guy that fills that role, yeah, I think it's going to be tough to, um, negotiate with myself. Okay, well, this guy's going to have more upside than, some of the other guys that we haven't mentioned yet, or even a guy ahead of him in James Cook, because you're going to get that PPR floor. So, um, yeah, I don't. Again, we'll see. We'll see where he goes in the draft, and hopefully be able to determine a little bit better if he's going to have as much upside as some of the other guys.
Yeah, I think the other thing kind of I know we've been talking a little bit about age, but I think one of the reasons too why this class in particular is so weak at running back is really the COVID year really messed up a lot. I think a lot of guys'
Yeah,
expectations of going to the NFL, going to the league. So of course last year I felt like the running backs were a little bit older. This year I feel like the running backs are a little bit older, but then of course looking into 2023 it's like the loaded class of like gems,
yeah,
which I think we're
right.
going to get back to like the normal like routine of like guys are coming out after the right after their junior year. Um,
Yep.
and early declaring. And I think that'll really help us dynasty managers as we start to get back to like that age gap. But right now, yeah, if as long as besides Brees in this class, well, and Kenneth Walker is pretty young.
Yeah,
Besides that, you gotta look out for age.
yeah. It's true. Like you mentioned that COVID's really screwed this whole thing up because it's almost like you're kind of skip a couple classes when it comes to some of these running backs. Like you're gonna get all these older running backs that are like the same age as some of these running backs that were like 2 classes ago, and when they were young for their class. So it's pretty weird. Hopefully it'll start to get back to normal because yeah, it's a lot of these guys are old. Um, moving on to I guess tied for sixth as well is Brian Robinson out of Alabama, coming in at 6'2", 225. He's I think the biggest back, at least probably BMI wise, maybe. Well, I guess Brees might be a little bit thicker on the BMI, but he's just towering big dude. He's kind of one of those prototypical Alabama running backs. Kind of reminds you of Derrick Henry a little bit in terms of his stature. I didn't have him in my top 8 just because I just I don't want to fall for the Alabama running back like trap because I don't see him as a guy that's anywhere near any of the previous Alabama running backs that have come out of there. And Najee Harris recently, you have Josh Jacobs, Damian Harris, just like the last few years. I just don't see him as one of those guys. I think this is kind of like an awkward gap year. I feel like they had the same it was like that all the way around for them, at least on the offensive side, minus like CJ Stroud. Like, they didn't even have a wide receiver. They would have had John Mechie as their wide receiver one if Jameson Williams hadn't transferred. They were in a weird kind of in betweener year, and so he had great games. I don't want to take that away from him, but I just don't. I wasn't like super happy with him as a prospect. I'm trying to go through here and see if I had. I think he went to the Senior Bowl. I know that there wasn't a lot of compliments coming out of there when he had finished, and I just don't. I don't know. I think if I'm not wrong, he's older too because he's been
Yeah,
there behind all these guys for
he's
some
23.
time now. Yeah, he's 20. He just turned 23, so maybe 23 and a half when the season starts. So he's the oldest guy we've talked about, I think, so far, other than maybe Rashad. But I don't know. I personally am out on him. I don't even know if I care where he gets drafted. I'm not a fan.
The rest of the guys we talk about, I'm not taking until the third round.
Yeah,
So if someone takes Brian Robinson in the 207 to 212 range, like good for you.
yeah,
I have him as my RB5. Kind of a lot of the reasons I have him as my RB5. He plays for Alabama, which doesn't mean a lot because, like we said, this was a down year for them. But when I look at just like the way he performed, like he did perform decently. He gives me like weird AJ Dillon / Gus Edwards vibes, where like he's just. But the difference is those guys like have like really like they're just built a lot differently. He's like a skinny big guy who's like kind of awkward in the way that he runs.
right, yeah,
Um, yeah, like I said, I wouldn't be if you wanted to throw a dart throw at Brian Robinson at the end of early third, if you needed a running back, cool. If he lands in a good situation and he gets like I said, like it's kind of like a J.K. Dobbins tears his ACL and then all of a sudden he's the starter somewhere, like that kind of situation. Like I could see him producing for a
yeah,
few weeks, but like I said, if you have a chance to take even like we mentioned, like John Mechie, like if it's between Brian Robinson and John Mechie on your board, I'm taking, like I said, taking the wide receiver, even though I don't like
yeah.
John Mechie as a wide receiver.
I
I
don't.
like
Yeah, I'm not a fan of him either. But you got to think like a 23 and a half year old running back, or a guy that's. You could take a little while to develop, and even like I feel like you might not be able to figure out who John Mechie is versus who Brian Robinson is, and so you could kind of hold off. Like if he has a poor down year, like somebody might still. I think he might have more value if he has a questionable year. John Mechie does this year. Than if Brian Robinson came out kind of had a dud year this year. He's like he's okay. He just a backup and came in on a couple whatever downs and they needed him because it's like okay, well next year he's going to be 24 and a half when the season starts, and if he really hasn't shown anything, like not that many people are going to be, salivating over Brian Robinson. Whereas John Mechie could have 8 more years left. So yeah, I agree with you on that. Just for reference, AJ Dillon is 6', 247, which I didn't even realize he was that heavy. That's kind of ridiculous. That
that's a
dude's
big
thick.
boy.
Yeah, they must be feeding him something different over there in Green Bay. Eddie Lacy was there a couple of years ago. That boy, man, he couldn't stop eating.
Well, there was the
Um,
cheese curds. It's all the
yeah,
cheese.
it's bad. The cheese curds and ice cream. But yeah, we'll move on to number 8 in our rankings. Damian Pierce out of Florida, 5'10", 218, running 4.38, 40. And he did do the bench. I don't know if very many other running backs did do the bench. He had 21 reps. I just remember this video of him benching and like he's like struggling, and the guy comes out to get that, and he's like, "Don't get that!" And then he just boom reps out another one. Instantly, that became one of my favorite guys, and so that's why I had him in my not the reason why I had him in my rankings, but I did like that. I had him at number 7, and like I didn't know anything about Damian Pierce during the college football season. I didn't watch sport all that much, and they kind of sucked. And then they fired their coach, and then watching his tape, the limited amount you get to because he only had like 500 yards, and then seeing people talking about the Senior Bowl, he was one of the best players out of the entire Senior Bowl to come out of there, and it was kind of like, wow, I understand why Dan Mullen got fired because he didn't use him at all appropriately. So he's just like a tiny little bowling ball. I mean, like I said, he's not super tall at 5'10", but he's 218. He's got a pretty good BMI, and I see him as a grinder. Like he's just one of those guys where I expect him to get those goal line touches. I expect him to get in between the tackles, just kind of run guys over. Um, and I mean I like him obviously more than Brian Robinson, but I just think he has decent upside from a touchdown perspective, which is fluky. I get that, but if he gets the right spot, maybe he could be of some value.
Yeah, I'm realizing like I made these rankings and now I think just our discussion, like a lot of it's changing my opinion. Damian
Yeah,
Pierce is probably my favorite like third round dart throw out
yeah,
of all the running backs. And I think the reason like he just reminds me so much of freaking Doug Martin back from Tampa Bay, the little hamster.
right.
Uh, and I think for Damian Pierce, the best situation that he's going to land in is if he lands on just a really bad team that doesn't have any that has a bunch of just jags at
Right.
running back, and hopefully somebody gets injured and he just gets a chance because
Yeah.
I think he does have. I mean, he doesn't really have a great agility score. His burst is low. He doesn't have a great speed score. I mean, he doesn't really have a lot going for him other than the fact that the dude's a dog and you
Yeah.
just know that like give him the ball and he's probably going to get like 3 to 4 yards. Um, so I just hope he gets that opportunity. But yeah, definitely third round if you're like I need a running back, which should not they're not always the best third
Right.
round selection, but just throw the dart at Damian Pierce. Try it out.
Yeah. I guess it depends if you're doing one QB super flex. Obviously, it depends quite a bit because you're probably gonna have 4 to 5 quarterbacks going. There's 4 to 5 spots. I think he'll be a second round pick in almost all of the leagues that I'm in. And if he's not, and if I have an early third, I would 100% get him. I would pick him at the 2-6, to be honest with you. And I'd say two, probably by the 2-4 and a 1 QB, and then maybe like 208 and a super flex. But I really feel like he'd be a solid middle of second round pick. I guess it depends on who's on the who's left on the board, obviously. But that if I had a stake, put a stake in one guy, I'd be like, he's at the bottom of our list. Who do you think could be a sleeper slash like just a guy that you really like? For me, it's Damian Pierce out of Florida. So we'll move on to number 9 out of Notre Dame, Kyron Williams, sitting at 5'9", 194. The one of the slowest people I have ever seen, according to Twitter. Twitter absolutely hates this guy. Ran a 4.65 40. Now I know he had his pro day, and they said he ran faster, but then there's discrepancies from other scouts saying they had different times that were much slower, and I don't know what to make of pro days really in terms of timing stuff. So I'm not even gonna mess with that. He went to the combine. Everyone's got the same. It's the same lane. You're running the exact same stuff, the same timer. 4.65 is what I got. Um, I just so he had a 32-inch vertical. That's one of the worst out of all the people on here. I was very sad because watching Notre Dame, of course, don't live very far from Notre Dame. I really liked watching him. Um, and I thought that he was going to be, honestly, I knew Brees Hall was out there, Isaiah Spiller's out there, Kenneth Walker's obviously racking up. I saw him as one of those top 4 running backs early in the season. I thought maybe he could be at like the 2 or the 3. And just watching off his college production, but he came in pretty light, and obviously he's only 5'9", and I just don't know. Um, I, It was tough. I couldn't quite get him in my top 10 or my top 8. I think he will provide quite a bit on a PPR standpoint because he can catch the ball. He's probably the best pass catcher in this rankings. Like I think he's fantastic, and he's a fantastic pass protector. He's one of the best in this class as well, which I think will get him on the field probably in those third down situations where you need a guy that can be able to do that. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of sad about it in general.
Yeah, I went to the Notre Dame Cincinnati game this last year, and not that I cheer for either team, just had free tickets,
Yeah.
and I just remember watching, yeah, Kyron Williams, like just it felt like he was always getting the ball. Like it just
Oh
and
yeah.
and also let's be clear, Notre Dame's quarterback situation was pretty bad this last year.
Yeah.
Pretty much him, and I'm forgetting the tight end's name off the top of my head, but he's a
Mayer.
stud. Mayer,
Michael
yeah,
Mayer.
Michael Mayer for next year. Yeah, I mean like those two guys were their whole offense.
Yep.
Um, and so I think Kyron Williams, it wasn't like it was just like this year thing. Like he was starting the year before, he had decent production, and then of course like his 40 time came out, and the Twitter community just went bonkers and just like essentially like
It
put
was bad.
the X mark on him and like no one draft him. I don't think it's going to be that bad. I think we're definitely overreacting as a community,
Yeah.
especially dynasty
Yeah.
community. He is 21 years old, so like that's going for him. I mean I've heard people say that they would take, and I'm realizing I ranked Brian Robinson and like James Cook, but I think I would still take Williams over those guys just based on age, um, and depending on landing spot. Like, dude just reminds me of like a James Cook, or not James Cook. He's in the rookie class, but like a James White, where you're just catching a lot of passes out
Yeah.
of the backfield, and if you land in one of those situations with hopefully a immobile quarterback and where they have to dump off the ball, like I think that's where you could like really succeed. But like we said, like if he gets out there and it's just really clear, dude's running, and he's got like a balloon on his back, like pulling him back, like I mean, it's just gonna it depends on how much you value speed. But I think he's
Yeah.
smart enough. He, like we said,
Yeah. I think he's got a high IQ.
oh, really high IQ. And the thing, like we said, you're playing at Notre Dame. You start did he start 2 or 3 years? It's been a while. Like he's had a decent role at Notre Dame,
Yeah.
so which is one of the best college programs here. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think he's got a good future.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, it was just disappointing that he slid as far as he had. And hopefully that's not just groupthink at this point. I don't want to throw him out of the rankings just because of all of that. I probably will have him scoot him back up when we go back around again. But yeah, it's just tough to see that kind of reaction to what happened. But we'll move on to our final guy, Tyler Beatty out of the University of Missouri or Missouri, yeah, University of Missouri. 5'8", 197, ran a 4.45, 40, and I this is an interesting one. I know you didn't have him in your top 8, but I just feel like this is one of the guys that at the back end of the second, maybe, and it won't keep be beginning of the third. That's just a really good upside play, because he had a fantastic production this past year at Missouri, and he has if I go back and look, he had really good production pretty much his whole entire college career, and he's playing in the SEC. He's playing, some non-Power Five conference like a guy like Pierre Strong or something like that. Where he might be a sleeper this year. But like, we'll go ahead and take a look at this year. He's got 268 attempts, 1,604 yards, 14 touchdowns, and Missouri kind of sucks. Like they're not good at football, so obviously they're going to be giving it to him quite a bit. But still, you're not going against these guys that are weaklings. You're going against the SEC. That's the best conference in college football, and you're active 1,600 yards. I do go back and I'm looking at this from 2020. He only had 242 total yards, which is kind of odd. Or that's just rushing yards. He did have 333 receiving yards in 2020, so he had even more receiving yards than he did rushing. But this past year, 1,604 rushing yards, and then he had 54 receptions for 330 yards and 4 additional touchdowns. So he has clearly a PPR upside, 54 receptions. That's incredible to me. Yeah, I just think he's got a really high upside, and I would enjoy getting him at the back end of the second round.
Yeah, Tyler Batty is like one of the Podfather's favorite like sleeper running backs. Really just reminds me a lot of like Giovanni Bernard, where you're kind of just getting like a lot of these guys that we're talking about right now are those like satellite running backs that you
Yeah.
hope the starter goes down because then they have that like PPR role.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't really have much other to add, but I agree with he played against high level competition, produced. He is 22 years old, so a little bit younger than some of the other guys we mentioned. I still think it's a little old, but like we said, we're dealing with what we get this year out of the running back class.
Yeah. Kyron Williams, we didn't mention this, but he is 21. He will turn 22 right as the season starts. So he is a little bit on the younger side of kind of this class. Looking at Damien Pierce, see what it is. Damien Pierce just turned 22, so he'll be 22 and a half. So yeah, I mean this class is this is a lot of seniors and quite a few super seniors. And if you look at, we said earlier, if you're going in between different guys trying to figure out, who you might take, and it's pretty even age. And this is after draft capital, obviously. Age is probably one of those indicators like, okay, well, obviously I'd rather take an extra year on a running back and be able to get the extra production out of him. So,
I think this year more than any other year, when I guess if you take anything away from like what we're talking about, this maybe is not the year that if you need a running back in that second round, I might be trying to package that pick to get
yeah,
a veteran, an older veteran, because at the same time, you're probably drafting somebody that's not as young as you actually think. And maybe if your league mate's not as smart, they might be like in love with, let's say they're in love with Brian Robinson or James Cook and not realize
right.
their actual age. So, yeah, definitely try to package those picks. Try to find that. I mean, you're not going to get an elite level running back, but you can definitely find that production value. I know last 2 years ago, Leonard Fournette, like right when at the end, like he didn't do really well in Jacksonville, and then he got like cut, and like no one knew where he was going to sign. And I remember a lot of people that I knew traded second round rookie picks for Leonard Fournette, and like look at where you're at now.
Yeah,
If you did that,
right,
like granted, Leonard Fournette's not like no spring chicken, but at the same
right.
time, he's
He's got
producing
to,
those RB1 seasons for a
yeah,
second round pick. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if you have a pick where, obviously we'll see what happens with the draft, but if you have a 105, 106, 107, super flex, and Kenneth Walker and Brees Hall have already gone, perhaps. I yeah, I mean I don't hate getting rid of that pick, and especially when you're in the rookie draft where the picks are worth the most, getting rid of that and getting a running back that what you're getting if someone's fallen in love with the Isaiah Spiller or Rashad White and you're not in on them. I'm 100% okay with you getting rid of that, maybe packaging it and getting somebody else that has a more established role already in the NFL.
yeah, and I think even just the other side of what we're even saying is, let's say you're even in the middle, like if you're at the 105 or 106, and you're either super flex or one quarterback, and you really need that running back. Like, I think a few years, like we said, like that class with CEH, like you were having to trade up give up future first. I don't think it's going to take that much this year to jump up, and I think you're getting that kind of same level of prospect. So if you're in need of a running back, I think don't worry like about trading for maybe a veteran. Just try to trade up and get Brees Hall.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you can do that, well, obviously a reasonable amount. If you have the 104 and you have another late first and you can combine that and get up to the 101 and get Brees Hall, I would do that in a heartbeat. Like the 104 and like the 108 or the 110 or something like that. Personally, I would do that and get Brees Hall because I think there's such a teardrop between those guys we mentioned. So,
Yeah, I think the other thing to even add is, especially when you're thinking about, oh well, I'm giving up 2 first round picks, like 40%, even in the most stacked year classes, like 40% of like there's like a 40% hit rate on first round picks.
yeah.
So if you like understand that and you're like fairly confident in the profile, which I think everyone is right now of Brees Hall, and hopefully we get that landing spot known over the next few weeks, like it's going to be all wheels up.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's all we got for you guys. Thank you so much for listening to this. Hope you guys have a great rest of the week. We'll see you later.